listening to the Xone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Radio's authority on the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology, celebrating 25 years of broadcasting. Broadcasting around the world and to the great beyond.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the Xone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back to the Xone. www.xoneradiotv.com is where you can go and listen to the show Monday through Friday from 8 p.m. Eastern until midnight. And the rest of the 24-hour clock is the best of the Xone shows that we've had going back to 1992. Once again, that's www.xoneradiotv.com. And if you'd like to send an email, xone@xoneradiotv.com, and on all social media sites, Xone Radio TV. My guest this hour is Joshua Shapiro, and we're going to be talking about the crystal skulls and much more this hour. And joining me now is Joshua Shapiro. And Joshua, great having you back here in the Xone.
Always an honor and privilege to be on the Xone, Rob.
Joshua, for our listeners who are hearing you for the first time here on the show, could you give them a little bit of a biography on yourself, and what was it that happened or that was instrumental in you doing the work you're doing now when it comes to the metaphysical world and all matter within?
Okay. I grew up in the Chicago area, and I think what happened in my early 20s is I started to meet all kinds of interesting people who had paranormal experiences. And being a typical Aries, when something of great interest comes into my attention, I'm going to go out and explore it. And I took the ultimate leap. I actually left Chicago and traveled on faith to go to California. And it was when I was traveling in California, this was back in 1982 and 83, and I met this amethyst crystal skull, which totally captivated me. And so then I started to research more about crystal skulls, and all of a sudden, before I knew it, I became what's known as a crystal skull explorer and started to write books and work with other people, and now also have a collection of my own personal skulls, and I work very closely with my divine life partner, Katrina Head. And what we are basically doing right now is in every form of media possible, we share the best information that we collect about the crystal skulls. And also now I'm becoming very involved with all different aspects of the paranormal and also UFOs and disclosure and, you know, writing novels to share some of this information. So I really have had an opportunity since the early 80s to travel all over the world, meet some great people, and research these different projects. And now we're based out in the Seattle area.
What has been the most startling revelation in the, let's say, the last 20 years when it comes to better understanding the significance of the crystal skulls?
Well, I think the most startling thing that's come to me is through direct contact of working with many different crystal skulls all over the world. So there's a couple of conclusions that I made. Now, I know some of these conclusions I shared on a special TV show, I think that was like on Discovery Channel, and the director assured me, that he would give it a proper attention. But I think what he was doing was listening to try to disprove things. So, but what I would say is the key for the crystal skulls, or this is the message I received when I met my first one, which was in 1983. It was an amethyst skull, which people call a me. Is the crystal skulls were sacred objects that worked with civilizations in our past, possibly Atlantis, Lemuria, indigenous cultures of the world, and are returning now. And I believe that They have a healing energy that's connected to them. I believe they have programmed knowledge and information that some people who are sensitive can receive, and that they have some role to play to help to create world peace. Because world peace was really the main message I received when I saw this first crystal skull.
Right.
And this has now been over 30 years, and I have never, ever gotten a different message than that. I just really think they're here to assist humanity and help wake us up to who we truly are. And another key message I think that comes from them is the key is to work together, cooperate, share knowledge, share information. This is part of the reason we're motivated to do these world peace meditations that we conduct. We do 13 every year, one on the 13th of the month and January 1st. And now we're also supporting some other Crystal Skull Guardians doing something called Crystal Skull World Day.
All right, stand by, Joshua. You and I have to take a short commercial break. Xone Nation, Joshua Shapiro is our special guest. Here's the website, csc.crystalskullexplorers.com. That's csc.crystalskullexplorers.com. And Joshua and I will be back on the other side of the short break as we continue here in the Xone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
You're listening to the Xone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Joshua Shapiro is our special guest this hour, Xone Nation. www.csc.crystalskullexplorers.com. What do we know about the crystal skulls so far, Joshua? What is their origin? What is their purpose?
Well, as far as their origin, and again, when we're speaking about crystal skulls, so the listeners understand, I'm talking about skull-shaped objects made like a human skull, made from quartz crystal. As far as where they've been coming out of and been found, predominantly connected to ancient civilizations from the past, especially the Mesoamerican cultures, Mexico and Central America. However, more recently, I've been hearing stories about people talking about skulls coming out in many different parts of the world. Some stories about possibly in Australia or under the water by Australia, in Europe. So I really think we're going to find crystal skulls and are finding crystal skulls all over the world. I gather from some of the indigenous people that I've spoken to, they always speak about them if they are familiar about them, and sometimes they are and they don't let you know this, that there are sacred objects that they've used in ceremony, which again seems to follow the message I talked about for world peace, that they would use the crystal skulls in their sacred ceremony to create a more peaceful and harmonious world, or to do healing of people in their civilization. What was the next part of the question that you asked me, like where are we going or what their purpose is?
What their purpose is?
Well, I would say their purpose is a couple of different things. Now, this is the one part that I was belittled on this special program that I mentioned I was on.
Yeah.
But it's the only way that I can explain from all my experiences and from listening to other people that I've met and people who write to us and people who attend our classes, etc., is I think that the primary purpose of what the crystal skulls are about is that they're like a vessel that is allowing other consciousness to be able to work in a way to have contact with humanity. What is this consciousness? Well, I can only speculate. It could be different types of spirits that are working through who love humanity and want to help us. And they animate the skull, and a lot of people get this sensing because they give their crystal skull a name, or they start talking with the skull, which some people think is ludicrous. For myself, my skulls will speak to me in what I call my mind's voice, Like, I'll be working on the computer and they're behind me, and all of a sudden I start hearing one or two of the skulls kind of talking in my mind. So I think what's happening is, if they're ET presences, if they're from the inner Earth, if they're from other dimensions, there's a lot of, let's say, dimensional beings that exist on other planes of existence who are working through the skulls, kind of like a communication device, in order to communicate knowledge and information and share energy with us. And so this would be number one point. And then, of course, the second point that comes up a lot for people is that, let's say, for example, they want to see one of the so-called very, very old skulls, ancient skulls, and they go and they have a session with it, just like they have sessions with our personal skulls. And there is a profound effect the energy of the skulls has upon them that's life-changing, very beneficial in a positive way, healing, some insight about what's going on in their life. They may have a vision, they may have a dream. The skull may set up certain energies for them that their whole life goes in a different direction. So it seems to be, I would say, the skulls are a conduit for contact with other intelligences who wish to assist humanity, but just like what the UFOs do, where you see them in the sky for 5-10 seconds and they leave and you wonder, did that really happen? It's kind of, they're working kind of in behind the scenes to help us, to get us to look at things, but really they're more of a reflection of what's inside of us, the potential inside of us. So this would be probably the easiest way I could summarize what I think the crystal skulls are doing right now.
Joshua, how far back in history has there been the awareness of the existence of crystal skulls?
Well, if you're asking about how far back in time, you have to divide it up into two parts. One part is how far back in time do the indigenous people know about these objects? Because they're the first ones who worked with them that seem to know about them. So we could be talking back to the time of Atlantis, which is, at least 12,000 years ago and probably a lot older. They could be coming from Lemuria. They could be gifts from the gods, which sometimes they talk about. But then if you look at it from a more modern perspective, when did the modern world really start having an interest in crystal skulls? And that really didn't start happening until, I'd say, the middle part of the 1800s. Like, for example, there's a museum in Paris that had a crystal skull in the 1870s. The British Museum skull shows up in 1898. I've heard when I was in Mexico City in the 1870s or 1880s, they had crystal skulls in museums down there. So this would be the time frame, I would say, when they're showing up. And, it's very difficult when you talk to the indigenous people who don't keep records of their history in general. It's word of mouth, it's legends. How do we understand or know what to believe? But, I've never found these indigenous people trying to share legends and trying to lie about them. They're trying to explain it the best way that they can.
And they're very proud about their heritage. They're very proud of their legends. And, why don't we take the indigenous people more serious? Why do we treat them as if they're third or fourth class citizens?
Yes, I agree with you. I don't understand this. There were 2 different indigenous tribes that I personally visited where they brought out for me this strange language, which was very complicated. And it had a lot of information. I didn't understand what it was saying. It didn't look like any language I had ever seen of the earth. So I suspect that these indigenous people probably 2 keys. Number one, that they're keeping secure their sacred artifacts and their sacred knowledge until it's the right time, whatever this means for them. Of course, many of them have prophecy. And the second thing is they're very concerned about Mother Earth, which is that she is a living being. And of course, this is experiences that I've had too as I've traveled, linking into the natural energies of the earth, that when we don't listen, like it was very interesting. There was one indigenous shaman I spoke to who explained to me when he was young how his elders brought him up. And all the ceremonies and everything was trying to get in total alignment with nature. And when his tribe lived in total alignment with the local nature, there was no disease, there was no illness, there was no crime, there was a total harmony. So I think it's very important, and that's their role, is to continue to try to teach the modern world how important it is to have this balance between nature and the technologies that we're working with.
Do the indigenous people and the elders and the information that you're receiving from the crystal skulls, is it too late for us? Have we gone beyond the point of repair?
That's a very good question, Rob, and I'm glad that you asked me that. And I'm going to answer it in a very unusual and a strange way. I'm going to do it. I can't prove this, but this is my experience. So the listeners will have to make their choice, whether they believe me or they don't believe me. There is a spirit guide that I have who has identified himself to me as Argus. Now, again, all this communication I'm receiving is on more of a feeling level and telepathic. So there's no way I can prove it. It's going on for me every day, all the time. I just accept it's normal. I know there are other people that have this experience. So when Argus comes to me, I say, Argus, who are you? Why are you talking to me? Are you trying to help me with the spiritual work with Katrina and I are involved in, whether it's crystal skulls or teaching about UFOs or the paranormal? And Argus says the following. He says, I am you in your future in this lifetime. I said, what? He said, yes, I am you. I will be who you will become in the future. And I said, well, I understand from a spiritual perspective that time and space, and according to some of the extraterrestrials that people are talking about too, are also speaking about in their own realities that time and space doesn't work the same for them as it works for us. So there's a possibility you could have a conversation with some aspect who is your future self. So I just said, okay, fine, I'll listen to what you have to say. And he shows me pictures and images of our future. And everything that I see in my mind's eye, which I believe comes from this being, is totally, absolutely loving and positive. And we're talking about, if he's correct and I'm not insane, what I'm seeing, that possibly within the next 20 to 40 or 50 years, this planet will be unrecognizable because we no longer will have the challenges that we're facing now. And I think that one of the catalysts that will bring this forward, because now I'm starting to write on my new website, this blog called Disclosure Chronicles, is a story that's coming to me, so I'm just trusting it. It's a fun experience or a fun exercise. And I believe that the talk about disclosure, it's going to be a catalyst that's going to bring us forward to this time that I'm seeing through Argus. So for whatever it's worth, that's what I feel. I can't shake. I can't talk myself out of it. I just feel it so strongly inside. I just accept within myself that this is our destiny, that humanity will work things out and we will have a time of peace.
That resonates with me as the truth, and it also reminds me of what a number of other guests have said who have been able to channel and communicate with those not only on the other side but in other realities and other dimensions. You and I have to take a news break right now, Joshua. Always great talking to you, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. Exonation, Joshua Shapiro is our guest. His website is cse.crystalskullexplorers.com. That's www.cse.crystalskullexplorers.com. And Joshua and I will be back on the other side of the short break with the news as we continue here in the Xone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
You're listening to the Xone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Joshua Shapiro is our guest this hour. cse.crystalskullexplorers.com. Everybody who has done research into the crystal skulls or reading about the crystal skulls find them to be fascinating, find them to be beautiful. And yet it seems the only crystal skull that most people know about is the Mitchell-Hedges skull. And I was wondering if you could tell us the story behind that skull.
Yes, I'd be happy to do so, Rob. I know the guardian of the skull, Bill Holman, very well. And I would say of every crystal skull that I've met so far personally, that's the one that has changed my life the most. So it'd be an honor to speak about it. As I understand it, from Anna Mitchell-Hedges, when she was alive, she lived to 100 years old. She participated with her father in an expedition to British Honduras, which is now known as the country of Belize, starting at the end of 1923, but she didn't arrive until around 1924. It is said on her 17th birthday, January 1st, 1924, she was climbing in one of the Mayan ruins there in that part of the world, a pyramid which had damage on it. She wanted to see the vista of the whole site, so she went to the top. On her way down, she saw sunlight being reflected from inside the pyramid, so she went back and told her father about it. Her father said, no, it's a piece of glass, it's nothing, but she felt it was important, so she kept insisting, and her father was able to get the local Mayan natives to start digging around the area where she saw this reflection. They lifted out some heavy stones, and then they lowered her inside because she was, very young and thin. She was able to go in toward where she saw the reflection. She took the object, put it in her sweater. They hauled her out, and it was the top part of a clear quartz crystal skull, meaning that the lower jaw wasn't present, but the rest of the skull is there. We actually have a crystal skull like this now that some superior carvers in China have made for us, which is 2 pieces.
Wow.
And purportedly, several weeks later, in an altar area, they found the lower jaw. And from what I'm told is the Mayan natives went crazy because this was a sacred artifact for them. They start dancing, kissing the ground, crying, and eventually they made a fire around it. And Mitchell-Hedges saw this was so important for them, he didn't have the heart to take it, so he gave it to the Mayan people. But the family claims that in 1927, after they completed their expedition to the area, and they had made agreements with the New York Museum, Native American Indian Museum in New York and the British Museum, that any objects that they found would go to those 2 museums. But because the head Mayan priest, when they left, presented the crystal skull to them as a gift, they were allowed to keep it. There was one period of time in the 1930s, I believe, Mr. Burney, who was a good friend of Mitchell-Hedges, had this crystal skull and was contacting museums about it. When I asked Anna Mitchell-Hedges the last time I saw her when she was alive, she said this was a personal friend of her father's, that he had given the skull to receive a loan to do a new expedition, and then his son started to try to sell the skull. His father had promised to Mitchell-Hedges he wouldn't do that, so Mitchell-Hedges quickly got the money to buy it back, and from 1944 till he passed away, and until Anna Mitchell-Hedges passed away, which was 2007. It was in the Mitchell-Hedges family, and now it is with Bill Holman, who is a very good friend of Miss Mitchell-Hedges, and she lived with him at the end of his life.
What
so
a
that's
story.
The story that's told of this crystal skull.
Why is it referred to by some as the crystal skull of doom?
Some people have called it this because they said that the Mayan priest had the ability to will death, but Anna Mitchell-Hedges, whenever she heard that, she would always say, no, it was to help a person who was terminally ill so that they could die in peace, but not to just, kill some person because, let's say, some priest says, well, I don't like this person, so I'm going to use the skull to will death. So that's the way that they talk about it. But every experience that I've personally had in the presence of that skull, and as well as talking to many other people who've had a chance to experience it, for almost everyone I know, there was some kind of energetic increase, there was some healing, there were some heightened emotions, some spiritual gifts that came out, some new information, new knowledge. So for most people I know, they've had a very positive response to the crystal skull.
Is there any truth to the rumors that the government of Belize is trying to get the crystal skull back into Belize?
I think, Rob, just like you, I've heard similar rumors. Yeah. I saw something on the internet. But since I'm not the guardian of the skull, I don't know, are the rumors true? You know how rumors go?
Yeah.
There's so many rumors. It's so easy to start rumors on it. But, it would make sense that if a sacred object, because I know this happens with Mexico, like they have all these sacred objects coming out of Mexico, and they actually had to create a law of antiquity so people couldn't keep robbing the treasures of that country. So it's possible that Belize may feel the same way. Again, I don't have information to confirm or deny that.
My wife and I were down in Belize 2 years ago, and even back then we could not get a straight answer from government officials whether or not this was in fact the truth or if it was an internet rumor that we read about on the internet. So, it's rather ironic. The information that you get from the crystal skulls, Were you clairaudient or clairvoyant prior to your work with the skulls?
I really don't know how to describe what my gifts are. When I talk to, let's say I go to a spiritual medium or I go to a sensitive whose gifts are so amazing and so incredible, I cannot think myself that I have this. But at the same time, I can't deny that whenever I'm going to, let's say, start to do writing, like this new story I'm writing called The Disclosure Chronicles, yesterday I wrote the next part, and I wasn't totally sure exactly, I had an idea. I kind of like saw the story in my mind's eye, but I didn't know what I was going to write, and the words just started flowing. So I think in a way, each of us is a channel for some type of energy or consciousness or knowledge. And the key, I would say, is we just have to get out of our way. And the same thing happens too. I do intuitive readings for people with the crystal skulls.
Right.
And they're totally spontaneous. I don't plan anything. And I've watched so many miracles and so many unbelievable things happen based upon the words or the interaction that I have with the person. So I don't know exactly, how to define it. I would say that when I do, let's say, a meditation with the crystal skull, or especially when I'm meditating with music that totally resonates with me, it's like every fiber in my body, I feel alive. I have some of the most profound and powerful meditations and healing that I've ever experienced, including any sacred area I've ever been to or any other experience I can think about. So I think what I would say is there's an energy. I mean, we've tested this. We've done scientific experiments with people where we've used Carillion cameras and meridian stress test systems where we've tested a person with a regular piece of crystal, and then we put the crystal skull, but then they were blindfolded and they didn't know what are they being tested with, and we saw that there seemed to be some type of energy that's connected with these crystal skulls that enhances who a person is. Now, when we did a test for the Sci-Fi Channel in the United States, which they did not broadcast in their 2-hour show, where we were working with the Mitchell-Hedges skull, and we were working with one of my contemporary-made skulls by a Brazilian carver. When the people were working with the Mitchell-Hedges skull, we saw energetically that the energy they received from that skull continued on after the experiment was over.
Wow.
So it was interesting observing this.
And, of course, anyone who's in broadcasting or a ham operator or anyone who was in the early days of CB radios, crystals were used to transmit the frequencies.
Definitely.
You had a receive crystal and a transmit crystal. Microphones have crystals in them. So crystals have played a very significant role throughout history, and especially modern history, when it comes to the communication aspect of life. And I maybe this is just what I believe the significance of the head is, that whoever is sending this information is wanting to know that the message is coming from the head. And how they signify this is by the head itself, the crystal skull. So I find it fascinating. And
I also think too, Rob, that the shape of the bone skull is also significant for the receiving of that energy and knowledge. There's something about the way it was constructed, because I believe that ultimately when we start linking into other levels of our being and consciousness,
right,
that the shape of the skull is conducive to help our waking consciousness to start to absorb and integrate this other energy that's coming in. I see it working the same as a true pyramid, where if you go 1/3 of the way down, it starts rejuvenating metal and enhancing a person's DNA. I think the shape of the skull does the same. And making it into quartz crystal, like you say, which is already conducive as a transmitter and receiver of so many different levels of frequency, this is a very powerful combination. But there has to also be one other part, which is an intelligence that's activating that skull so all of this can happen. And that's, I would say, my conclusion from all the ones I've met. There always seems to be some intelligence that's talking with me or aware that I'm there. And I don't know how to explain that other than just call it a consciousness or intelligence.
Maybe we should consider the fact that the skulls, the crystal skulls, or crystal in general, are like data drives. That information from the minds of everyone is actually absorbed and maintained in these skulls, and that at various times the creators or those who have harnessed the ability of the skull to be a storage unit, the data is released and new data is put in. So maybe this is how the skull is actually able to communicate. This is just a theory, but I'm sitting here talking to you, and all these weird things are going through my mind. It's just
I don't think you're
amazing.
that far from the truth. There have been some researchers who've been able to get holographic images to appear inside of the crystal skulls using color, light, and sound. So if you're doing that, it means there's already something inside of it that's been recorded. And that's the sensing that I've always had when I've been around crystal skulls, is that they have the ability to record on some level everything that's going on around them.
Exactly.
And somehow there's some other beings who can just tap into that, and they can see, okay, here's what happened, or here's this history, or here's what's going on right now.
Or here's what's going to happen in the future, because there are stories of people who use crystal balls to see the future. Maybe that's not so far off. Maybe they are able to trigger something with their own energy that interacts with the energy of the crystal skull or the crystal ball, where they are able to manipulate time.
Yeah, it's possible. The one thing I can tell you that we observe repeatedly, because Katrina is constantly selling crystal skulls to different people to help them to get their own skull, is that the internal structure of the crystal, once she starts working with them, places them with our other skull, like after a few days, the internal structure totally shifts and changes. Now, this is a solid object. It's not supposed to do this, but we see it happen so much, we just take it for granted. This is just the way it works.
Truly fascinating topic. Truly fascinating. What is it like for someone who is a believer in the crystal skulls the first time that they are in the presence of a real crystal skull?
I would say that for most people who believe in it, when they finally get to meet, let's say, a special crystal skull they've been waiting to meet that they've heard about, from different stories that I've heard from people, the range of experiences can be anywhere from going into a deep meditation to having profound vision, to having their dreams affected, to seeing major changes happen in their life after they meet the skull. And by major changes, because this kind of happened to me, I think, after I started working with the skulls, is those things in your life that no longer worked, relationships or situations that were destructive for you, that made you miserable or made you nervous, would kind of be kicked out, and all of a sudden a new direction would appear. So all these kind of things, I think, have taken place with people. Even if a person just starts with one, they're never the same. And then if a person decides to become what we call a guardian, and I warn them about this, I say, look, if you're going to accept to have a crystal skull become part of your life's never going to be the same again. Are you willing to do that? And a lot of people just say, I just feel I have to do this, or this particular crystal skull is calling to me. I don't know why I have to have it, but I know I must have this one to work with it. So I've seen a lot of experiences that people have had where their life has changed, but in a beneficial and a positive way. This is ultimately what I think the crystal skulls are about. It's a catalyst to help us to become more of who we truly are inside of ourselves.
You know, and then I was, as you were talking about a catalyst and what the crystal skulls could be, didn't Superman live in a fortress in the north in a crystal palace?
Absolutely. Fortress of Solitude.
Yeah.
It was supposedly a crystal from Krypton he put into the snow, and it created this whole cavern and cave for him. And then he had access, to records from Krypton. His mother and father were speaking to him. It was quite an amazing place. Supergirl, which is a new TV series that's on here in America, she just went into this cave in the last episode, as a matter of fact.
All right, let's talk more on the other side of this break. Exonation, Joshua Shapiro is my special guest, cse.crystalskullexplorers.com, and we'll be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the Xone with yours truly, Rob McConnell. You're listening to the Xone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Joshua Shapiro is our special guest for this hour. We've been talking about crystal skulls. His website is cse.crystalskullexplorers.com. Joshua, as always, great having you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise when it comes to the crystal skulls. What do you foresee? And I know you're not a psychic, but based on the knowledge that you have received from the crystal skulls, what do they foresee for the future? Will we be able to turn everything around? And will there be contact in the near future between those of us on this planet and others who live on other planets who many believe are visiting us?
What I feel from the crystal skulls is absolutely we have a future ahead of us, and it's going to be glorious. And I believe that the key to that future, besides all these sacred tools that are coming out to help us, is going to be disclosure. Now, by definition, disclosure means when official agencies finally admit that we've been having contact, which I understand has been going on since the 1930s. But even if they choose not to do so, I believe that there's a lot of people who have been involved with, I don't know if they're secret projects, or have been contactees or abductees or researchers or pilots, astronauts, the whole wealth of people. But when I did my world peace meditation with the crystal skulls on January 1st, I heard very clearly a voice say 2016 is the year of disclosure. So I would not be surprised, Rob, to look out the window one day in the not-too-distant future and expect it to be normal to see not only human beings walking our streets, but extraterrestrials walking our streets. I think it's impossible that there cannot be any other intelligent life anywhere else in the universe. I personally have had my own direct contacts, and I know for a fact that this is true. And like many of my friends I know who've also had their own experiences, we're just waiting for this to come, and it's getting really, really close. I mean, I've been watching a lot of things on YouTube and the internet and so on, and I am convinced that we are very close to have this happen, and it will be for a positive reason to help us transform into a more peaceful state and more consciously aware.
We've got about a minute left, and if you could give me a short answer to this question, why do you think the governments of the world have maintained this truth embargo against the UFOs and ETs?
I would go along with what Colonel Corso said in a day after Roswell. When it first happened with Roswell crashing, they knew people were not ready for this. Mm-hmm. And I think the problem was they kept it secret too long. They would now be caught into a lie. So they are just allowing other people basically to share it right now. But if they don't do something directly soon, I believe the extraterrestrials will take a step. And that's what the story is all about that I'm writing on my blog, is what would happen if the extraterrestrials initiate disclosure.
Joshua, once again, thank you so much for joining us, my friend. I look forward to the next time you come back and visit us. And please, let's not make it as long as it was this time.
I agree, Rob. Thank you so much. A pleasure to be here.
Take care of yourself, Joshua, and my regards to your better half.
Thank you so much.
Good night now. Xone Nation, Joshua Shapiro has been my guest. www.cse.crystalskullexplorers.com. And I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the Xone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.